Thank you. Use that some other time. All righty. You ready? Pop quiz. All right. Pop quiz. Let's see who can look at their chart the fastest. All right. In chapter 1, Marjol, in chapter 1,
Chart.
who was the judge?
Othniel.
No, there was no judge.
Oh.
Trick question. There was no judge in chapter 1 or in chapter 2. In chapter 1, we just found out that Israel did not drive out their enemies. This sort of laid the foundation of what was going on and kind of foreshadowed then what was going to happen in the chapters that followed. I'll save you the embarrassment. Chapter 2, there's still no judge. Chapter 2 introduces this whole sin cycle that continues all the way through until chapter 21. Now, chapter 3. Who was one of the judges, Marge?
Othniel?
Yes, Othniel was one of the judges. And who else? They had 2 more judges. It's
Shamgar.
Yes, Shamgar and Ehud.
Ehud.
Very good. In chapters 4 and 5, who was the judge?
Deborah.
Not the judge.
Gideon? No.
Deborah was a prophetess. So who was the judge?
Oh, that guy.
Deborah and Barak. Yes, and Barak. Yes.
I thought he was just a hang around her. I thought
She
was the judge.
He was a judge, and he wanted his prophet by his side. He wanted the prophet in his pocket just in case God decided to talk to her again. In chapters 6 through 8, who did we see? Gideon, yes, and his brave 300. In chapter 9, who was the judge?
Nobody.
Nobody was the judge. This is all about Abimelech as king, Israel's first king. Technically, because he did serve as king for 3 years, he was not God appointed, but he was self-appointed. But it does say he was their king, and he did rule for 3 years. In chapter 10, we don't know a whole lot about these people, but who were the 2 judges of chapter 10?
Tola
Yes.
and Yair.
Yes. Tola and Yair. In 11 through 12, now this was just last week, 11 through 12, who were the 4 judges? One main one, and then 3 just kind of were mentioned.
Jephthah.
Jephthah was, yes, he was the big one that we talked about. And who were the other 3? One of them had 70 sons, 70 grandsons, and a whole lot of donkeys. Yes. Ibzan was one, yes. And then finally, Ephraim got themselves a judge out of their land. And he was
I gotta look.
Elon. And then actually Abdon. And then there was Elon.
Yeah.
And then there was Elon. So far, okay, here's a really trick question. What's the judge for 13 through 16?
Samson.
Samson, yes, that should be easy. We just did him this week.
Yeah.
Or studied him this week. So yes, so Samson. Now we already looked at chapter 17 through 21, and there are no judges. So once we hit chapter 16 with Samson, and that's the end of the judges that we're told about. That's it. 17 through 21 has no judges. It only has that repeated phrase that Israel had no king and everyone did what was right in their own sight. So chronologically, this probably happened closer to chapter 1 or in chapter 2, or maybe even a little bit before, maybe a little between Joshua and Judges, or kind of intermixed in there in the beginning. We don't know. And we're actually going to look at it more in depth next week and more in context of the situation and what Israel was kind of looking like in the context of all of these judges. Which brings us then to chapter 13. And it starts out the same way, if they had a nice ancient Hebrew word that just meant ditto, they could have just put ditto in there and probably saved themselves a whole lot of ink. But the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, so he brought them under their enemy, who was who? That was a horrible sentence. But who was their enemy?
Philistines.
The Philistines. Again, still. The Philistines actually had what's called a pentapolis. They had 5 major cities that took up kind of their land, I guess. It was Gaza, Ashdod, the Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath. And Gath is real famous because who came from Gath? Goliath came from Gath. So 5, it was a pentapolis. And what tribe was stuck right there in the middle?
Dan.
Yes, the tribe of Dan. And we know eventually they just tucked tail and went up north and left their allotted land in the middle of this pentapolis. And in the tribe of Dan was a family. And this family couldn't have children. And they didn't give his mom a name. She was just a certain woman. I find that this woman, certain woman, is pretty popular all through Scripture because she's just given the name a certain woman. So she's just a certain woman, but her husband gets a name. So what's her husband's name?
Manoah?
Noah or something?
Yes.
Noah? Oh,
Yes. And so she couldn't have a baby. So somebody comes and visits her. A man of God comes and visits her and says, you are going to have a baby. Now, what was so different or set aside about this baby?
Nazarite.
He was going to be a Nazarite. He was going to be a Nazir, which just means somebody consecrated or somebody devoted or a devoted person. We only see this word and this term in Numbers, here in Judges, Lamentations, and Amos. Those are the only 4 books of the Bible we actually see this word used. Now, there are Nazirs. Typically, Nazir, if you're going to consecrate, first of all, you typically consecrate yourself. And there's a certain amount of time that you consecrate yourself. And for various different reasons, men will consecrate themselves. This was different because this messenger, this angel of God, told her that he would be consecrated from the very beginning, from birth. So because he was to be born a Nazarite, a Nazir, he had to then sort of develop as a Nazir. So his mom was actually given some restrictions when she got pregnant. And what were those restrictions?
No haircuts, no wine.
No, for her.
Oh, for
Before
her.
he was born, what were her personal restrictions?
She couldn't drink wine or any strong.
Vinegar.
Yeah, she couldn't even eat grapes. So hopefully she didn't have a bad craving. Because grapes, I learned this from my father, grapes actually will grow a mold on them. And so this mold would actually start to ferment them before they're ever picked. And he learned this from a person who owned a winery anyway when he was in France. And so they only grow in certain areas because they want a certain mold to grow. And so she couldn't eat any grapes because it might have already started to ferment and she wouldn't know it. So grapes were out, no fermented drinks, and she could not touch anything that was unclean. She couldn't eat any unclean food, which really that went for everybody. So that was not really unusual for her. After Samson was born, he would also have all of those restrictions plus 2 more restrictions. And what were those 2 extra restrictions for him once he was actually born?
No haircut.
Yep, no haircut. And what was the other one?
Couldn't touch a dead body.
He couldn't touch a dead body, not a dead animal, not a dead body, and he would not even be allowed to bury his own family. So no dead bodies, no dead animals, no dead anything, still couldn't drink wine, couldn't cut his hair, and so he was set apart. Now,
I'm sorry, Kristina, when it talked about no razor could touch his head, did that include his beard?
Yes, they everything grew.
Okay.
Like no shave November, your whole life. Typically, when someone declared themselves a Nazir, when someone set themselves apart and consecrated themselves, it was for a certain amount of time. And so at the end of that time, they could have had haircuts all the way up till that time. During the time that they had set aside to consecrate themselves to God, this is typically when they would follow those strict rules about what they drank and their hair. And then afterwards, they could cut their hair, they could eat whatever, not eat whatever they wanted, but they could drink whatever they wanted, they could eat grapes, not a big deal. Samson, though, is supposed to be a Nazarite, a Nazir from birth, which also conjures up, he would be a Nazir his entire life.
Right.
So he was never going to not or to stop being a Nazir as long as he followed these rules, and he kept himself consecrated to God, which we'll get into that. This angel told her something else about her son who had not even been conceived yet. And what did she tell him? Or what did he tell her?
He'd deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines.
It doesn't say he would deliver them. What's it say?
Begin to deliver.
He will begin to deliver. Now, if I'm a mama and an angel came and told me that my son that I was going to have, which isn't even conceived yet, was going to begin to deliver Israel from this enemy that we've had for 40 years, it tells us 40 years, they were suppressed under these Philistines this time around, it would I'd want to be happy, but it would also kind of break my heart because, one, we're looking at a really long time before Israel can even conceive, forgive the pun, of ever being free from the Philistines, because he's got to be conceived, he's got to be born, he's got to be potty trained, he's got to be, weaned, he's got to grow up and be an adult man. So while I would be very thrilled that my son would be the one to begin to deliver God's people from the hand of their enemy, a huge repressor of their enemy, it would still be like, wow, we're still looking at a long time. Is there not a guy already born? Could that guy start and then Samson will kind of pick up and finish it off?
Right.
And so in a way, like I said, did anybody else think that when they saw that this was going to be a long time? And typically when we saw judges, the Shoftaim being called, it was pretty quick from the time they were called to the time that they actually went and did something. And we're looking, best guess, I'm thinking, 20 years minimum before they would ever be able to get out from under. And this was just the beginning to get out from under them.
So here's a question.
Sure.
And maybe I'm jumping ahead of things a bit, but so if Israel was under the Philistines for 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
Samson was born,
Mm-hmm.
and he judged Israel for another 20 years, but he never delivered them from Israel. So in reality, they were under the thumb of the Philistines for 60 years. Is that right?
That would be 80.
Or
No, because 20,
20 and 40 is 60,
I
at
know,
least in my math.
but it was 20 while he was growing. We'll give him growing time, and 20 while he.
Well, it says at the end that he judged Israel for 20
Right.
years.
20 years.
But what Emily's saying is, but we got to get him old enough first.
Right.
So if they were
Okay,
already
okay.
oppressing for 40 years and then he would judge for 20 years, we still have to give him growing up time.
Right.
Time to be born and time to grow up is what she's counting as roughly, theoretically about 20 more years, 20, 21,
Okay, so
22
it doesn't
years.
necessarily say when he started judging.
Judging.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
they were being oppressed while he was growing
Oh
up.
yeah, he was growing up under oppression. We just don't know how long or how old when he started. We just don't know that. We just know that once he actually began, then it was 20 years.
Right.
And then it still wasn't over. And honest to goodness, they're still under the thumb of the Philistines, because who are the Philistines now? Palestinians. Palestinian is just a word, a modern translation of Philistine. So if you want to get technical, they are still under the thumb of the Philistines. They had already had 2 judges get them out, but they brought them to peace, but they did not destroy the Philistines. Because if you remember, Shamgar killed, 300 of them with his little pointed stick. And then Jephthah defeated the Philistines and the Amorites and brought peace, but it was like they didn't totally destroy them. Because by the time we get to Samson, who is only, 3 or 4 judges after Jephthah, once we get to Samson, they've not only multiplied, they've taken over a huge chunk of Israel and really surrounded, Dan completely, to the point where Dan eventually just leaves and goes up north to get away from him because he can't do anything.
Right.
So they left their allotted land, all because they didn't do what God told them to do from the beginning. That's why. And so these ripples just keep going and going and going, and they're still going. So, good wife that this certain woman was, she told her husband. And her husband needed a little bit of clarification. So he politely asked God to send back this man of God. And God did it. So I don't think God had a problem with him saying, I kind of need some answers here, God. I need to make sure my wife heard this right. So Manoah invited the man to eat, and the guy said, no, let's make a sacrifice. So Manoah did. He went and got the sacrifice, and it was consumed by fire from heaven. And it's at that point that Manoah understood he was not talking to a man of God, like a prophet. He was actually talking to an angel, a messenger of God. And should that make a difference?
It probably shouldn't, but I think it does.
Oh, I think it does.
Yeah.
I think I probably believe an angel more than I believe a prophet.
Yeah, because, a prophet should be speaking the word of God.
Right.
But an angel of God is
absolutely going to.
Yeah.
Then we have Samson born. They named him Shimshon, not Samson, Shimshon, which actually means one like the sun, who was bright like the sun, like the sunshine, like the sun. A great name. And it says the Spirit of God began to stir in him. So here's another beginning. Began to stir him in Mahane Dan, between Zor and Ashtol. So in kind of close to his hometown. We know absolutely nothing about Samson and how he grew up. We know nothing. We can assume that his parents kept the Nazirite vow for him when he was little, and then taught him to keep it when he was older. But like every child, he didn't always obey. Anything about chapter 13 before we go into chapter 14? Anything at all? Because here's where things kind of start going south for Samson. Samson went down to Timnah, the little town of Timnah, and he saw a pretty lady. Now, it reminds us she was pretty in verse 3 and again in verse 7. So he sees this pretty lady, never says he went and talked to her, never says he had any conversation with her, never said he got very close to her at all, never said he asked anybody about her any information. He saw her, he wanted her, he went to his parents and said, I want this woman and I want to marry her. But look what it says in verse 4. Who was actually ordaining this union? God.
Yeah.
God. It says his parents didn't know that it was from God. For God was looking for an occasion against the Philistines. And at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel, in case we forgot. So Samson went down to Timnah. And while he was on his way, what happened to him?
Oh, he got the lion.
A lion, a big lion, came running after him. And what happened?
Killed him with a jump.
No, what happened first?
The Spirit of the Lord came out.
Yes, the Spirit of the Lord came on him. Now we see this phrase over and over and over and over and over again, which to me, and it always precedes some supernatural strength thing that he did. So to me, that means he didn't always have it. It was this Spirit of God. I believe he had the Spirit of God, but the Spirit of God for these big, strong strength endeavors, things that he did, was when the occasion called for it, or when God needed him to have that strength. And so what did he do with the lion?
Killed it.
Yeah, he ripped it apart. But then we have a problem.
It's dead.
It's dead.
Mhm.
And bees made honey, got a honeycomb and built a hive in this dead animal. Now, I don't know anything about bees. Do bees typically make hives in dead animals?
I've never seen it.
I've never heard of it.
I haven't either. My knowledge about honey is, from Winnie the Pooh. And their honeycombs are always, they're always in the trees. And so I didn't think so either. So do you think maybe this was a test for Samson? If it was, he flunked it pretty bad, because I don't know how you're going to get something out of a dead animal without actually touching the dead animal. So it was a strike against him. So if this was a test, he failed it pretty miserably. Do you think he knew that? Do you think he knew that it was something he wasn't supposed to do, and he did it anyway?
Yeah.
I
Or did
think
he
I,
just
I
think it
think
was
so.
a dead body, not a dead.
What does that do then?
Well, I understand that. But did
didn't
he?
tell his
Do you think
parents
he
either.
just thought it was a dead people that he wasn't supposed to
I
touch?
don't know, because it said dead animals and dead people.
I'd forgotten that.
So,
And he didn't tell anybody.
and he didn't tell
He kept
anybody,
it
and I
secret.
think he's. Well, I'll say what I think about him. So then he went on, and he actually married the Philistine woman. Now, here's where my mind went. He married a Philistine woman when God told him not to marry the Philistine women, but God ordained him to marry the Philistine woman. Anybody else's mind kind of go a little, clickety, trying to reconcile that? So did God give him an exemption, or?
Well, it said there, in verse 4 that
Yeah.
Okay, whichever verse it was.
It's in verse 4.
That God had a plan. He wanted to instigate this little
That was
dig
verse
into
4.
the Philistines.
Yeah.
That was verse 4.
Did he tell Samson that?
No.
No, does God tell us Does God tell
No,
us?
no. But my point is, so did Samson think he was doing something right because God told him to do it, or did he think he was doing something wrong because he was going against what God told him to do?
By marrying her, you mean?
Yeah, by marrying a Philistine.
I think Samson had other plans, period. I don't think.
Samson, yeah. Samson is
He's
in the
a
vernacular of my children, my older children. He was kind of a whacked out judge. If you think about it, he really was. There was not a whole lot of holy about him. What, honey?
I said that would be cray-cray.
Cray, yes. But there's not a whole lot of holy about him. But God called him. God knew what kind of person Samson was. I say this about myself all the time. God knew I would be a hot mess. And he made me, and he called me anyway. God knew what kind of person Samson was going on. That's for meals. Just take all their information. I'm sorry, guys.
Hold 1 second, please.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm taking reservations for the community Thanksgiving dinner, and part of the time is from 7 to 9, so I apologize. Oscar's going to take that for me, though. So he married her. He married this Philistine woman, and 30 men were brought in to be with Samson during this 7-day wedding feast. Weddings were a huge deal in ancient Israel. These weddings, and they took 7 days. There was a lot of feasting, a lot of eating, a lot of partying, a lot of everything. So he asked these guys a riddle, and he gave them a riddle, and he gave them 3 days. After 3 days, they couldn't solve the riddle. Now, what was kind of at stake? If they could answer the riddle, what did Samson have to give to them?
30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes.
And if they did not, what did they have to give to him?
The 30.
Yes, the same thing. They didn't have the money to go giving him anything kind of expensive clothes. So they did the only thing, I guess, that they figured that they could do, and they went and they threatened his wife. And they threatened his wife and her family that if she did not find out the answer to this riddle, that they were going to kill them. This woman is very, very different from Delilah. I don't fault her for trying to find out, for being sneaky and finding out the answer. Because I can't say for me that I would not do something like that to save my family.
Because they went directly to the family.
Yes.
They went directly to the threat.
Delilah, however, was paid. Mm-hmm. Very different. There was no threat against her. There was just a reward for her behavior.
Right.
So she told him. She told him what the answer was. And they went and they told Samson, and Samson gave a really ugly answer.
Yeah.
If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle.
Mm-hmm.
Not very flattering to a woman that you just married. He went off. Oh, go ahead.
These men, I mean, I'm assuming they were Philistines.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Why just Philistines come to the wedding? Why not any of Samson's family or any Israelites or Danites, or why not? Why?
They probably had them. They probably had a whole bunch of people there. It was 7 days. I mean, that's a long time. A lot of people coming in and out, lots going on. So they probably did have a lot of Danites. They just pulled out these 30 because it was just these 30 who went with him, and so he's the one they're the ones that he told the riddle to.
I thought it was like a bachelor party.
Yeah, well, it could. Yeah, they were his buddy. Yeah. When he found out that his wife betrayed him, he went to a neighboring town of Eshkelon, which is still in the Pentapolis, and he killed 30 men. He murdered them. This was not killing. This was murder. So now I also broke one of the 10 Commandments. He murdered 30 men and he stole their clothes. I don't know how you get clothes off of a dead person without touching the dead person. So now Samson has twice touched a dead body.
Well, the lion he killed makes it 3.
3. And he also then, well, now actually he touched 30, over 30 dead bodies because there was 30 of them.
He probably had help.
Yeah, and he committed murder. Well, it says he did, and he committed murder. Nowhere in any of this do I see that the Spirit of God came on Samson.
Right,
So this was not a God-ordained act.
right.
This was an act of absolute anger and vengeance. Then we see that the Spirit of God, we do. The Spirit of God did come on him. In verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord came on him mightily, and he killed 30 men. So I apologize. He did. This is the beginning of Samson delivering Israel from the Philistines. This is his first act, even though it's murder as far as I'm concerned, killing these 30 men. Because killing these 30 men sets off a chain of events that is pretty much tit for tat, revenge, 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 over and over and over again. Because after he killed these 30 men and he gave the obligation, he gave these men their 30 sets of clothes, he gave his wife away. He didn't divorce her. He gave her to his best man. Now, at this point, they may not have signed the final legal, because there's two actual agreements in a marriage.
Right.
But that first agreement was signed. So they were betrothed. So legally they were married, even though they may or may not have consummated the marriage. They were still married in the law. And he gave his wife away, did not divorce her, walked away from her and gave her to another man.
It doesn't say that, does it?
No,
Yes.
yeah, I think it
says
says
his
her
wife-
father gave her away.
Yeah, his father gave.
Yeah,
No,
In
hold on.
20, it said Samson's wife was given, and then in 15:2, her father said, "I really thought that you hated her intensely, so I gave her to your companion."
I read verse 20. I'm in chapter 14, verse 20. But Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his best friend or his best man.
right.
I saw that as him like abandoning her and just giving her to someone else.
I did the first time, and then I saw
Abandoned.
15.
But she was given by the
Well,
father.
but then in 15, we don't know how much time has lapsed because he goes back with a gift, with a goat, and said, I'm going to go to my wife in her room. And her father said, she already married somebody else, which, I mean, she was a Philistine, so I can't tell you what Philistine rules about marriage and all that is because I don't have a clue. But this would not have really cut it in Israel. This is not how things are done in Israel. Said, I thought you hated her, and I gave her, just let her marry your best friend, your best man, and just let her marry him. And I saw that as he gave her away to his best man and left because he was in a huff, and he went back to his daddy's house because he was in a huff. And then he had some time to think about it because we're getting to the wheat harvest and he's having some time to think. And so he went back, and whether he gave her to his best man just to take care of, to kind of watch over, to make sure nothing happened to her, we don't know. He may have had the best intentions of the world and just wanted her tucked away while he went and blew off some steam somewhere. We don't know. And then I read it as, because it was taking so long, and it's not like he went and slept it off and came back and got her, her husband said, you know what? Go ahead and marry her. Go ahead and marry her. And so he did. And in retaliation, he grabs, poor foxes. This story used to always make me cry when I was growing up because I felt bad for the foxes. He grabbed 300 foxes. Where did he keep 300 foxes?
That's what I want
Where
to
did he get them? I don't know. But Samson found 300 foxes, and he tied their little tails together, and then he found 150 torches, and he put them between them, and he set them off into the Philistine crops. And they were burnt. I mean, they were absolutely destroyed. And here's this cycle again. As revenge, more revenge, the Philistines snagged up his ex-wife, burned her and her father, but not Samson's best friend. Burned her father. And so as revenge for that, it just says he struck them with a great slaughter. Revenge, 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 revenge. And as I was looking over this again today, it made me think, you know what? This is why God says revenge is mine. Because this just escalates and escalates and escalates and escalates and escalates until a lot of people are dead. But when we sit back, when we step back and we allow God to seek revenge and allow God to have his righteous vengeance, it's done. It's done. Enemies are done. And there isn't this revenge and revenge and revenge and this constant cycle, which it seems that his entire period of judging is nothing but 20 years of just, he gets them, they get him. He gets them, they get him. Did anybody else think that way? That this was just a very different judgehood, if you will, a very different period of time.
It felt like a spoiled teenager.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. Mike doesn't like when I call biblical people spoiled brats and little children, but that's what he was acting like. But somehow, in God's sovereignty, this was God's plan of his beginning to get rid of the Philistines to free Israel. It doesn't seem like, to me, it makes more sense that Gideon sat on a hill with 300 men with pots and a oil jar and shofars than this does. This just seems way out there. But we know all the way from 13:4, this was God's plan. This is what God's plan was. And that's why he needed a personality like Samson to stir things up with the Philistines. Did you also notice that it never says he really leaves the Pentapolis? Well, he does. He runs to Judah. The Philistines went to Judah. And they were there to get Samson anyway, but they had to go back to the Pentapolis because that's where he was. He kind of hung out there. So it's not like he was flying, he was running way up south and way down south and constantly trying to get away from them. He seems to have always been right there. So why do you think they went to Judah? And it says they camped to Lahai, and they told him while they were there to go and get Samson. And how many men from Judah went to go get Samson? 3,000 men. Do you think Samson's reputation was starting to spread? Because why in the world else would 3,000 people have to go after one little man? And so the Philistines were still their lords. So they didn't have a choice. They had to go get him. If the Philistines said, go get him, they didn't have a choice. They had to. And so they sent 3,000 men to go get him. And what was the deal that Samson made with them?
Don't kill me.
Yeah.
Just
if you promise not to kill me, I'll go with you peacefully. Did anybody else find that funny? Because honestly, if the Spirit of God came over him at that very moment, they couldn't have killed him if they wanted to. These were his own people. These were Israelites. These were not Philistines.
Mhm.
And so then the Spirit of God came over Samson, and he broke his bonds. And what did he do?
Smacked him with the jawbone.
Yeah, he found a jawbone, and he killed 1,000 men. And when he finished, he threw it down, and he named the place Ramat Lehi, which means the high place of the jawbone. They were very creative. Anyone find it interesting that he did not take revenge on the men of Judah? He didn't go back to Judah and burn it to the ground. He didn't go and find a bunch of foxes and set them loose in their fields and in their crops. As a matter of fact, it says he went to Gaza. He went to Gaza. He never
Well, he
sought
probably
revenge.
knew that they, like you said, they didn't have a choice.
And was Samson's responsibility or was his job to go after Israel?
Yeah.
No. His calling was to go after the Philistines. And as Pastor Mike said last Sunday, he had to stay in his lane. He stayed in his lane, and he left the men of Judah alone. And he went back to Gaza, back into the Pentapolis, back closer to home. And it says he judged for 20 years. Did the oppression end with Samson? No, it didn't. And like we talked about, it's still going on from their descendants. Do you ever feel that God called you to do something, to start something, but you weren't going to be the one to finish it? Maybe it was such a long-term project that you wouldn't live through it. Or maybe then he suddenly moved you to someplace else, and you're like, but you called me to do, one thing, and now I'm doing something else. But this isn't the first time that we saw a judge start deliverance, and they're not the ones who finished it. Look at Gideon
Mhm.
with his army of 300. Look at Barak. He had an army of tens of thousands, but who got the credit? Yael, because she's the one who pegged the man in the head, the commander. Look at Abimelech. He killed thousands of people to become king, but he was killed by
A woman.
a woman with a millstone. There were other judges who fought the Philistines, and they gave Israel's reprieve. They gave them rest, but they did not annihilate their enemy. As a matter of fact, are we ever told who picked up right after Samson and actually delivered them? Are we told in the book of Judges? No, we're not. We're not told. We know that they're still huge, even into the time of David. So we don't know who went and finally finished the Philistines. Certainly not one of the judges. Does that mean that what Samson did, he did in vain?
No, because the Lord said he'd begin. He didn't say he'd finish.
You finish it. But when you begin something, if somebody's going to finish it, don't we think it's going to be very linear? I go from A to B, and you pick up and you take it from C to D. And we don't see that. And so many times I think we see ourselves as failures because we don't accomplish what we thought or what we planned to accomplish in our lives when we're called by God to do something. And we don't see the end of it, or maybe he moves us on to something else, or maybe he moves you completely, physically to someplace else. And we're like, but God, wait, this is where I was supposed to be. This is what you called me to do, and now you're telling me don't do it anymore. So did I hear you wrong, or did I do something wrong? And we start to blame ourselves when really what God's saying is, I only called you to begin it.
That's our Western thinking.
It is. But it's our human thinking. I think, as humans.
I don't know that necessarily people who have a more fluid thinking style would be as tied into the I started it, I must finish it way of thinking. That if they, just because they've been called to start something and then they very clearly understand that God's calling them to move a different direction, they're not as conflicted about that secondary call, because they understand that God is fluid in how he wants people to move.
Well, maybe it's just me. Oscar and I have both been in situations, I'll tell on you, honey, have both been in situations where we started something and were called very much to start something, and one just fell on its head, and it's like, wow, okay. And then another one, actually someone came and picked it up and it kind of, I hate to say it this way, but kind of basked in the glory of the beginning and is now getting all of the credit. And that does hurt. And that's our own pride. And I understand that. But I think sometimes it's hard to stop something or to start something, to be called to start, and you don't ever see it in fruition, come to fruition. I think it'd be difficult.
I don't disagree with you. I think that it can be difficult, but I think it's more difficult for our Western mindsets. I just think it is.
Okay.
After having lived in the Middle East, and their weird mind thinking, a way of thinking, I think that it's probably a very normal.
Yeah, we don't think like them at all.
No. But anybody else? Maybe that's just me and my.
No, it's not just you. It's not just you. I don't, like I said, I don't disagree with you. I think it is difficult. But it's, yeah, anyway.
Well, this happens throughout the Bible. I mean, God, Moses not going across and seeing the promised land. You've got David in the tabernacle. I mean, he started it and he knew he wasn't going to finish it. I mean, it didn't seem to be a problem.
I don't know. To me, they had very clear reasons why.
Right.
They didn't get to finish. And I mean, we could probably sit here and point out all kinds of reasons in Samson's life. But the fact is, we just don't know. We don't know. Chapter 16 is a very frustrating chapter. It is a facepalm, head shake,
Yeah.
what in the world kind of chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Samson went back to Gaza. He visited a harlot. Surprise. And he visited a harlot. Men, however, surrounded it and they waited for him all night long at the gate, because they thought, wow, in the morning we'll be able to go in and we'll be able to kill him. What they didn't count on was Samson deciding to go for a little 40-mile stroll at midnight, carrying 8,000-pound city gate with him. This was a huge display of strength, followed by a huge display of weakness on Samson's part. And I think we can all agree that Samson had an issue with women. And he absolutely lost every level of common sense anywhere that a woman is concerned. He saw a pretty lady, he wanted her, he married her, he left her, and she got burned, quite literally. He went to one harlot, went to another harlot, and then he ended up loving a woman and betraying him. And it's funny to me that this portion of his story starts out with Samson loved. We have never seen Samson love anything, let alone a woman, up to this point. But it says Samson loved Delilah.
Doesn't
We
say
back up
anything about her
Sure,
loving him.
sure. 1 second. He wants us to
What
talk
is the significance? Is there any
what?
significance in this? Him taking the hold of the doors of the gate and the two posts and putting them on his shoulder, taking them to the top of the mountain. What is all that for?
Well, if you think about the city gate, first of all, these men were outside the gate, right? So he did it while these men were like still sleeping because they woke up and he was up there. Second of all, if a city doesn't have a gate, it's very vulnerable.
Okay.
The gates being closed at night and open in the morning was really to keep everybody safe. That was supposed to be inside, keep them inside and safe, and everybody's supposed to be outside, stays outside. Well, now he just took their city gates and he trekked them up 40 miles up a mountain and he left them.
Okay. All right.
And so to me, that is a huge display of look how vulnerable you really are for me. I can take all the gates off of every city wall in every city in your entire Pentopolis, and then what's that going to leave you? That's going to leave you defenseless. That's going to leave you susceptible to raiders, to people coming in and out, to all kinds of things. Because it's not like they could go down to Home Depot and grab Josh and say, here are the specs, build me a new city wall. These were 8,000 pounds. They were about 60 foot high, and they were made from parallel pairs of massive stone blocks. This took a while. So to me, that was just a show of his strength versus their susceptibility or their
Vulnerability.
vulnerability. Thank you. And their vulnerability. I think that's what it's showing.
Okay.
And it's showing that he had great strength and he also lacked sorely in common sense.
That is ridiculous strength.
He was
That is.
Well, why didn't he need the Spirit of God for this strength? I mean, all of his other feats of strength were preceded by the Spirit of God came upon him.
Yes, but do I think the Spirit of God came upon him for this? I do. I know it doesn't say that. And this is the only time of strength, of his show of strength, that it did not say that the Spirit of God came upon him. But I absolutely believe the Spirit of God did come upon him. It just, for some reason, was not written here. And I love it. After this, after he did this trek, it came about he loved a woman in the valley. His name was, talk about like just a shift, a total diametric shift in this story, this saga. Now, his typical MO was to go for women that he should have absolutely stayed away from, who enticed him, seduced him, deceived him, and pressed him until they got what they wanted from him. And the men of Gaza wanted to know how could they defeat Samson. Who wouldn't expect that? I mean, who wouldn't want that, especially after what he had just done to the gates? And they offered Delilah 1,100 pieces of silver if she could find out what the secret to his superhuman strength was. She asked him 3 times. 3 times he lied to her, flat out lied. And 3 times these random men popped out of nowhere and tried to nab him. And 3 times he managed to escape. Delilah is an amazing actress because she got him to believe that she is actually the victim. Because she said, how, Samson, can you love me and continue to lie to me? Now, if I was Samson, I probably would have said, how can you say you love me when you are so painfully, obviously trying to kill me? And by the way, who are these men that keep randomly popping out of places in your house and attacking me? And how do they keep getting in? But he doesn't. He doesn't ask the question. It never says they're married. He could have left. Nothing could have stopped him. Literally, nothing could have stopped him from walking away. It would not take someone trying to kill me 3 times and have people jump out of closets in my house and grab me before I realized this was a pretty toxic relationship. But he doesn't because he loved her. But love's got to have limits. And love's got to have boundaries. And she sure as heck crossed them more than once.
Oh, absolutely.
So she finally annoyed him to death. Ladies, this is good news for us. Because it's biblical, we can claim it, right? We can now annoy our men to death. Sorry, guys. So he finally tells her the truth. And shock and surprise, he's captured. He's captured, his eyes are gouged out, and he's put in prison. And that's not all he lost. Because what else did he lose?
Eyesight.
Lost his eyesight,
The power of God.
and he lost God. Because it says God left him. He had all of these chances. He murdered. He touched dead bodies. It doesn't say he drank wine, but it's not a far thought, I think, to think that he didn't go throughout his whole wedding ceremony and not drink those 7 days, which is pretty much a drink fest. And God stayed with him through it all. But he had his hair cut, and God left him. And now he's in prison with the Philistines. I'm pretty sure he was not treated well. No hair, no eyes, no strength, no God. His hair grew back just enough while he was in prison. Now, we don't know how long he was in prison. We don't know how long his hair got. But doggone if I wouldn't have hired someone to go into his prison cell every day and shave him bald just to make sure his hair didn't grow back. But they didn't. And it grew just enough. So when they planned this huge party, this huge festival to honor their God for giving them Samson, he was led around by the hand by a little boy, by a little servant boy. And he said, "Would you please take me to a pillar because I'm tired?" Samson had probably never uttered those words in his life. I don't think Samson ever felt so helpless in his life. And so he put him up against a pillar. And while he was up against that pillar, what did he do?
Pray to God.
Called out to God. He pleaded with God. And he only asked God for one thing. And what did he ask God for?
Revenge.
Vengeance.
Yeah, the strength. Put your spirit on me one more time. And give me the strength to destroy the enemy. But I think the unspoken is also give me the strength to die while I do it. Because there's nothing in here, to me, that even suggests that he thought he would live through this. So he knew he was going to die. He knew what needed to happen. He pushed on the pillars after the Spirit of God came onto him, and he killed more Philistines in his moment of weakness, calling out to God, than he ever did in the 20 years preceding that as Israel's judge. And I think those verses speak louder to me than anything else in that chapter. Because when we are at our absolute lowest, when we feel like we have been defeated every way that can possibly be defeated, and we feel like our strength is gone, our hope is gone, our faith is gone, that God's not necessarily gone, but he's certainly not, moving the way that we think we're going to be, he should be moving, and we feel very lost and very alone, and we stay that way until we change our focus and we call out to God and we say, God, I need you. Please fill me with your Spirit again. And that, I believe, and in my life, is when God moves, when God shows me that new thing, that way in the desert, that water in the midst of the famine. And that's when we are able to do more. Paul said, when I am weak, I am strong. Not me and myself, but when I understand my weakness and I call out to God, that's where my strength comes from. And that's when we do big, mighty things in the name and for the glory of God. So, 3 chapters. What are your takeaways from Samson's life?
He ended up in Hebrews 11.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He's in the Hall of
Figure that out for me.
He's in the Hall of Faith.
Well, that gives us hope.
It does give us hope. It does. We can say, I can never be Gideon. I don't think I could ever lead 300 men with the faith that Gideon had against an army of 10,000 people. And win and chase the kings, clear to the other side of the nation at the bottom, drag them back, and take revenge on the people who wouldn't feed me, and do all of these amazing, magnanimous things. But I can see I think we can all see us and the humanity of Samson, that he messed up. But the fact that he messed up did not negate his calling. And it did not negate God's power to bring about the anointing that he had for Samson's life. And he ended up in Hebrews 11. In our great hall of faith. What's it say? Because it's what did it say about him in Hebrews 11?
But his strength.
That is strength. And where did strength come from? It came from God. It didn't come from.
Well, it came, his weakness.
So what are some takeaways from Samson's life that we can apply to our own life? Oh, come on, nothing? Nothing at all? 3 chapters in the Bible and we can't find anything that we can relate to?
That out of bad can come good.
Yeah. When who gets involved?
When God,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think we can still be great if we are only great in moments. Samson was not great all the time.
the time.
But when the Spirit of God came over him, he was still able to do great things and accomplish God's plan. So we may not think we are great. We may not think we are world changers. We may not, think that we could ever live up to whoever we feel like we need to live up to. But that doesn't mean that God will not give us great moments. Did God speak to any of you with respect to like Manoah and his certain woman wife and their desire to be parents? Did it seem like to anyone else that every time a woman cannot have a baby and she has a baby, that baby's always for something great?
Special, yeah.
Always for something like, yeah. He doesn't just give them kids and say, congrats. Always for something special. Do we ever think of our own kids that way? That God meant them for something special? We may not know what it's for. Believe me, there are some of ours that I really question. But God still gave them because he made them for a purpose. So obviously this world needs them. And there's something for them to do. So
After watching our youngest, these last 3 years raising, these 2 special needs babies, you hear this a lot, that they're that special needs children are placed in the families that they're in for a reason. And I believe that with Evan and Becca firmly, even though they're not believers, those babies are in the perfect family for them.
and we don't know what plan God has for
For-
Jack and Naomi either.
No.
Anyone else? Anything else? We finished really early. No, nothing from any. How about this? Anything at all from the first 16 chapters of Judges? Anything at all that you hadn't read before? Samson. We like to think we know Samson. We like to think we know the story. Did you find anything new or different, or something that you didn't really know, or maybe God showed you something that you'd read 1,000 times over your life and you're just now seeing it for the first time? It's like, oh my gosh. Anything? Anyone?
Well,
I
really,
hadn't realized how conniving Delilah was. You read that story and you read it, but for some reason, it just hit me today at how conniving she was.
well, I think him
And I know-
getting his eyes gouged out, that really struck me more this time when I read it. And I'm thinking, how horrible could that have been? I just can't imagine. I mean, it wasn't like he went to surgery and they took his eyes out, I can't imagine anybody living through that,
Through that, yeah, that pain.
Yeah, that horrible.
And him being a grinder is the lowest form of punishment. I mean, they kind of just say that real quick. They
Yeah.
put it in there because they used it to shame grind him.
Well, that's all he could do. I mean, he couldn't see, but he could hold
But
on
it's
and walk
also
around
in
in
that
circles.
era was the lowest form of punishment. They were humbling him.
Yeah, well, he definitely was humbled.
Oh, absolutely.
But you have to wonder if he had been more of a Nazarite all through his life, would have God been able to use him more than he did?
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we'll never know. And then,
Yeah.
of course, I'm thinking, what did his parents think about all of this? We're never told that his parents tried to correct him. We're never told that, that his parents tried to talk to him while he was in prison. I mean, we're never told anything beyond when he went and told his parents, "Hey, go get me," his first wife. We're not told
you
of the
almost
interaction.
get the sense of other. I've met other parents who've been blessed with children late in life after years of not having children, and who go overboard,
Mhm.
and I just almost get the sense of that's who Samson was.
Mm. Yeah.
That kid that didn't have boundaries almost.
Well, it's got to be
kind of how he behaves.
It's got to be hard knowing that an angel told you that your son is going to begin to save your nation from your enemy, and you have to raise him as that. And how do you go and correct someone that God had a calling on their life? How do you go and correct them?
Well,
but you see what I'm saying? Like how that would be difficult.
but don't you, as we all do, owe it to God and our children
Absolutely.
to do that?
Absolutely. We would not be where we are as a nation at this point if parents would have told their little boys and little girls that they are little boys and little girls and not played into their fantasy. And that's just me.
Yep.
And quit letting your kid believe they're cats and foxes, please.
Yeah, I remember Adam, I can't remember what the specific thing was anymore, but he was all upset with me because I made him do something. And I was tucking him in bed that night, and he said, "Well, I don't understand why you even care. Why is it that important?" And I just remember saying, because one of these days I'm going to have to stand before God and give an account of how I raised you.
And I think we'll have to give an account of our times of silence as much as our times of speaking.
Right. And I told Adam, I said, and I don't want to stand there and tell him I didn't care enough not to make you do the right thing.
Yeah.
I remember that he was maybe 9 or 10, something like that. But
it's not easy.
Parenting
is not easy. And being a purposeful, believing parent, tasked with raising believing children is not easy. It's not easy.
And I think it must be much, much, much more difficult now than it was, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You have my prayers.
We're dealing with some stuff right now that with our littles that just was not even on our radar with our big 6 at all. And so it's just we find ourselves just really going round and round and round in circles, and every time we think we have an answer to something, like 40 different questions come up, and we're like, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? And and I could see it would just be so easy to just say, forget it, just get along to go along, and we'll deal with it later. And we can't do that. And It's so difficult. It's so difficult. And our prayer, my prayer, is that, you know, we are able to get them and to have them raised in that community of believers, so that they don't feel like the odd people out.
Mhm.
You know, they don't feel like they're the only ones with, you know, a psycho mom. But so yeah, I mean, it is even different from the big six, that 17-year gap between them and the littles. It's like night and day. It really is. So we appreciate your prayers. Definitely. Anything else? I appreciate all of you. Next week, we will meet in person at the church at 5:30 to 6 o'clock.